Hello and welcome back to another Meme History. My name is Mr.Cannon and I will be your teacher for this lesson. Today we will be taking a look at World War I, also known as the Great War. Because, it would be kind of weird if they called it World War I before World War II was a thing, because math and yeah. Anyways, we will be viewing this lesson from a more European perspective to better understand this global conflict. But before we can truly talk about the wonderful wide world of World War I, we have to first understand Maine. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So let's break it down. The building up of a military, not only with soldiers, but also with equipment and new tools. This also means that European nations begin to put more of an emphasis onto the military and sort of glorify the wars and the acts of combat. Alliances. Before World War I, there was really only two alliances, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. We will talk about this a little bit later, but picture it, as you would, like this. A joke I make in World War I is that it's basically a gang war. Why? Well, because if one country threatens another country, soon they get all their boys and they roll up and they start beating on each other. It's just basically, if you punch one person, everyone else is going to get mad who's that person's friend, and it's just a constant fighting. Nationalism. Yep, we're skipping imperialism for a second. Why? Because nationalism is super easy to understand. Think of pride in one's nation, real, intense, patriotic pride. Okay, moving on. Imperialism, the big one. To really understand this, we need to think about the last 2 weeks, or several pictures, or several worksheets. We need to have a lot of time to really understand this. Alternatively, we could have a pie, one small child, and me. But like with robot arms who shoot snakes and punch penguins for their tears. In this poorly thought out nightmare of a scenario, this pie is the world. And the small child represents every country in the world that has not reached the age of industrialization as the Europeans have. I, with my giant robot arms of penguin fury, am a European with factories and an economy and a modern military. No matter how much that little kid wants that pie, it shall always be mine, for I am the stronger and I am the better because of my penguin beating arms. Anyways. More simply put, stronger nations that had industrialized by this point in time were able to produce more, and thus they were able to support their growth and their military. As such, they were able to take their power and use it to control smaller nations, mainly to gain their resources or to one-up their rivals. The world, by the end of the 1800s, was totally imperialized, mostly by European nations that had forcefully conquered or captured small nations around the world. As a result, Europeans were constantly watching their neighbors, fearing that they too might fall victim to these larger nations. To appear more threatening, militarism and alliances, and then later nationalism, were all used to try to unify their people or to make them stronger or to have stronger allies to deter fighting. It was all about trying to make yourself look bigger, kind of like if you're fighting a cougar, which I don't suggest you doing. I don't think that'll work. So, with this all out of the way, now we can really talk about World War I. Keep in mind this video will serve as a very brief recap or an intro into this unit, and a lot of the information has been cut down to keep this video fairly short. So to simply explain World War I, we have to talk first about this legit dude from this country known as Austria-Hungary, who gets whacked. His death is a problem for Austria, as the old king that's in power is like 80 or so years old at this point in time, and is basically left without a direct heir to the throne. And Prince Archduke Ferdinand is now dead, this guy who gets killed. Not wanting to appear weak and wanting to send a strong message to this nation known as Serbia, the Austrian-Hungarian king, the emperor, at this point in time pushes them and says, you have to let us investigate, and if you don't, we will declare war. Serbia doesn't really care because it just got its independence from the Ottoman Empire and it wants to appear strong so that no nation attempts to bully it. So they decide not to respond to this message. Inevitably, Austria, not wanting to look weak, has to act, so they go to war. This is what happens. Serbia calls on its buddy Russia, who calls on all its friends. Austria does the same thing, except Italy says yeet and switches sides. Prussia and Austria, both German nations, now ready themselves to fight the other powers, which they do. As the fighting begins, the good old Ottoman Empire decides to pull a sneaky one on Russia in an attempt to conquer land that had slowly been lost since it had grown weak. The Ottoman Empire at this point in time is kind of known as the sick man of Europe because they've just lost so much power. At first, everyone is really happy about this war. It's been almost 20 years or so, 30 years almost, since there's really been a war in Europe. So they wanted to push forward and they wanted to have this war to show which nation was actually stronger. Unfortunately, after just about a year of fighting, it quickly becomes a stalemate, and the alliances kind of make it this reason. This war is terrible. Seriously, Google it. Battles are fought for mere inches, not miles. Trenches are used, machine guns which had never been seen before, tanks are created, airplanes are actually going to be used, but not really to perfection. But nothing really changes the war. For almost 5 years, this is a world war. Colonies of these nations attempt to support their European overlords. Eventually, it gets so bad that Russia even has a revolution and has to drop out of the war, becoming communism. But we'll talk about communism in a little bit later. Though all of this is not lost, as Americans join the fight and end up helping the quote-unquote good guys, the Triple Entente, which by the end of the war changed their name to the Alliance, or the Allies. The war continues, but soon Germany and the Ottomans both lose. To ensure a war like this never happens, to ensure another great war never sparks, the world collectively decides to blame Germany, particularly Prussia. They give all of the war debts. Everything is their fault. This basically destroys the economy of this nation. There is simply no way for Germany to pay off all of Europe's destruction. The reason for this is known as the Treaty of Versailles, which does end the war, but again places all of the blame on Germany, Prussia to be exact. A League of Nations is also created, something that's supposed to help end wars before they start. But it doesn't work. The League of Nations is actually very weak, and it is not something that's going to be very effective at stopping wars. All of these things collectively are going to create the perfect scenario for World War II to actually start. A much, 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 much worse battle. So that's always fun. My name has been Mr. Cannon. I hope this video has been helpful to you, and I hope you have learned something. But above all else, I hope you have a solid day. Can't wait to have World War II talks. Oh boy.